Right. Well, good evening, everybody. This is, I believe, our third monthly talk for the Carpenters Fellowship. And tonight we have the pleasure of Mr. Tim Kirk, who is going to be giving us a talk on the reconstruction of the Sutton Hoo ship found in Mound 1 at Sutton Hoo, the Anglo-Saxon ship. They are, as far as I'm sure he's going to fill us in on all of this, but as far as I'm aware, they are building it in a traditional manner using traditional tools, in very similar fashion to how a lot of us build our timber frames. So I'll pass it over to Tim before I make any more mistakes about exactly what it is he does do. And yes, carry on, Tim. Thank you.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. I'm the master shipwright on the project, so basically it's my responsibility to make sure everything goes well and get all the people and the materials in the right place at the right time. And a few slides here. Hopefully this will all work out. Can you see a picture of an excavation?
No, I've just got you at the moment, I'm afraid, Tim.
Hang on. Okay. I've got the host disabled participant screen sharing. Can you enable me to share the screen?
Just let's get that sorted. Tim, Morton, can you get that sorted?
Yeah, I will try. I don't know why it's doing that. Screen share, screen share. Oh, lordy. I thought it just did that anyway. Sorry. I'm looking in settings and it says share screen. I've done it before. Why is it not share all? It seems to be about me sharing schemes. Sorry, screens. Screen sharing. Why is it not doing that? Let me just pause the recording.
How's that?
Ah, there we go.
There we are then.
Well done. Fantastic.
I'll just go back one and then there we are. So this is first few pictures here are the original excavation of the ship. So in 1939, Mrs. Edith Pretty, who was the landowner at Sutton Hoo, asked, well, she decided she wanted to investigate the mounds that were on her land. And she asked a local archaeologist, Basil Brown, to see what he could find. So he picked a small mound to start with. And then eventually he got to this mound, Mound 1. And you can see, I think, from here, just what a large hole he dug. And he started at one end and gradually went into it. And he found this reddish discoloration in the soil. And having got through the reddish discoloration, he found a rusty nail head, or actually a rove. And so from there, he went on until eventually they got to great wealth. And so the picture on the left here, let me see if I can get my little, if I can get this pointer to work. So if you can you see the red pointer on the left?
Yep.
Yep, jolly good. So here we have, this is W.F. Grimes in the burial chamber, which was in the center of the ship. And we've got the great silver bowl here. And he's actually working in this section on a chain that held a large cauldron. The cauldron would have been set over the fire in the great hall. And they reckon the chain on the cauldron was something like 5 meters, 16 foot long, to reach from the main beam and sit over the fire. It would have been a massive haul, and they think they found that this year. But these are some of the things that they began to find. And the image on the right is of 2 gold and garnet. The diamond-shaped areas were filled with garnets and blue faience. So these are the types of things that they were finding. amongst others. And you can see the gold glinting even on an old black and white photograph. And now all of those artifacts have been curated, and a lot of them have been replicated, reconstructed. But the last one to be reconstructed really is the ship. No one's ever had managed to get the inclination and the group of people together and the funding together to actually rebuild the ship. So the ship was nearly 27 meters long, so 88 feet long and about 14 feet, so it's over 4.5 meters really in beam. And from the side of the excavation here at the top of the ship to the bottom of where the ladder is would have been 4 or 5 feet. So it's a massive amount of earth that they shifted, first to dig through the mound to the ground level, and then to dig down into the excavation. But what they found were these rows of rusty nails, most of them in situ, and the sand image, the sand imprint of the planks and the frames crossing the ship. So it's acidic sand, and all the timber had rotted away, but they did find this sand image. It was like a hardened core of sand, and almost like the surface of a meringue, it's said, so that it was quite a rigid surface. But if you poked through the surface, you got a layer of dry sand running out of it. And so these two pictures, the first one is black and white, and that's looking from the bow of the ship at the eastern end back to the stern. And the color one is the opposite way. So it's from the stern to the bow. And the chap in the hat here and in the green pullover there, that's Commander J.K. Hutchinson, and he was from the Science Museum, and he was commissioned to make a plan of the ship. And this is the plan that they made and published, and it's not quite as we would expect it. There's funny bits in the ends of the ship where they're spoon-ended, and it's cut away because the very ends of the timbers had rotted off. So this would be the ground surface basically, and everything above it had rotted off. But they did, considering it was 1939 and they were right up against the start of the Second War, they managed to produce a really quite effective drawing of it, and it also includes details of some of the frames and the nail layouts in the frames. It included some of the sections of the frames and various bits and fittings in the ship. And that was it. Everything was put underground until after the war, and they got the shiny pieces out, and everybody seemed to forget about the ship until the mid-1960s, when Rupert Bruce Mitford, who is Keeper of Antiquities at the British Museum, he re-excavated the site, and he actually confirmed a lot of the nail positions. They set a grid system up above the excavation. The excavation hadn't been backfilled at the end of the 1939 excavation. It had just been lined with ferns and withies and left for the war. And the army thought it'd be a really good site to drive tanks over to train tank crews. And so it got damaged further, but there was still quite a bit of it left. And at the end of that second excavation, they were able to confirm a lot of the data and develop new information as well. So we have these two main drawings to work from. Unfortunately, Hutchinson died in the war, and all the detailed calculations and coordinates for the various nails were burnt by his wife. But we had these two drawings, and we had a set of about 800 photographs taken by two amateur photographers, two female amateur photographers, some of which were in color. And from that, we were able to commission Southampton University to develop a 3D digital drawing. Now, I don't know if any of you use 3D design, but what it does is it enables us to really play around with the various shapes and lines of things. So Southampton were able to put all the rivet positions that they could locate from the drawings in place, and then put frame lines around it. So here on the left in drawing A, you can see there's places where the nails are all nicely lined up, but you can see some are sticking out through the edges of planks. And there's one here which is on a funny alignment. And they're able to do all of this. In drawing B, you can see where there's a line of rivets that sort of don't quite run true to the rest of the ship. So the potential there for a drawing error or originally, or for a plank to have been nailed offline, or all sorts of different things. And they were able to, Southampton were able to do this and to work out where all the lines of the ship were accurately to modern standards. One of the biggest things that they found was in these two drawings on the right, drawings of keels of ships, whether it be this one or later Viking ships, have always been drawn straight, because everybody knows that keels of ships are straight. Well, actually, when they came to put the keel drawing onto the rivets, they actually found that they didn't match up. And so they were able to then change the line of the keel drawing to actually fit the rivets, and found that the keel was substantially curved at each end. And in fact, on the drawing as it is now, let's go to that one, there's virtually none of the keel of the ship is straight. So this is the modern drawing that we are working to. And it has its benefits and it has its negatives as well. It's open to interpretation, the interpretation of the people who input the data to the computer. And it's open to, computers always draw straight lines. So there's no allowance made for any curvature in any waviness in the lines of the frames crossing the ship. And we can see if we look at extant remains. So on the left, we've got the Gokstad ship, and you'll see the date there is 185. That's 1885. It's not 1985. That's when this was excavated and the photograph taken. And you can see all the deformation to the ship and the bits that are missing. And on the right is the Graveney boat, which was excavated on the Kent marshes near Graveney. And you can see there that it's not, things are pretty straight, but it's not exact. And so now as shipwrights, we have to interpret the drawing and take into account all of the other things that go on in order to build what we think is the most accurate ship that we can. And so the way we do that, we have to compromise a little bit, because we are trying to get an archaeologically accurate ship, accurate to what went into the ground in 624-25 AD probably. So we are using these temporary softwood molds, whereas the Saxons would have done the whole thing by eye, and they would have used the bevel angles of the planks, and they would have been continually changing, and the widths of the planks based on their experience to actually build the ship. We've done it slightly different. We've lofted it out full size. And you can see on this piece of timber on the left, we've marked all the water lines on it. They are on 4-inch centers, 100mm centers. And you might just be able to see the lines on the lofted board there. And there's a line running down here, which we can transfer to the piece of timber, and we can cut the curves that we want to make for the various frames of the ship. And that's possibly similar to what some of you folk do in your work. And here we've got, some of these are large pieces of timber. This is a pattern for the stern post of the ship, and these are full-size sheets of plywood, 8 foot by 4 foot plywood. So we've got 8, 16, probably 20 foot of length there, and 12, 14 foot of height. So this is a big piece of timber. And on the other hand, as an experimental tool and to double check the digital drawings, we lofted it to 1/5 scale as well. And that's what these molds, plywood molds, are for. So we built a model in 1/5 scale, and we built a full-size mock-up of the middle section of the ship before we started on the full-size ship. And while we were doing all these drawings, we were also gathering tools and materials, learning how to cleave timber. So this is Dr. Damien Goodburn, who over the last 35 years has become acknowledged as an expert in the history of boat building and wood. He's done a lot of excavation in the Roman port of London and various other places, built numerous log boats and things like that. And Damien taught us a lot about how to cleave timber and how to work with traditional tools. So here we are, we've set up in the long shed. This is in Woodbridge in Suffolk. We've set up our 1/5 scale model, and we've set up the molds for, this is just one half of the midship section. Eventually we built the other half onto it. And Mike here, one of our volunteers, this is in the early days, he's giving a talk to the local Sea Scouts. So we then had to search for the right sorts of timber. So this is actually in Swindon, west of England. It took us about 18 months to find the right tree for the keel. This one in the picture with the leaves on the trees, obviously this is 2 different times a year. This one is September, and this is an oak tree, 40 foot long, basically, 40 foot straight and clear. It'd be about 2'6" diameter at the butt, I suppose. And we went to view that the week before the first lockdown in 2020. And I went specifically to look at this one tree, and it was the right tree, and the Forestry England agreed that we could have it. And while we were there, so this is at the time in the February, we turned around and there was this big curved tree, and they didn't know what to do with this. They were about to cut it down. But to me, I was able to look at it and see this has got exactly the curvature that we want for the extensions to the keel. So the keel of the ship, the backbone of the ship, runs the whole length of the ship, and the keel is about 60 feet long. And so we've got the majority of it, we could get the curve out of the natural bend in the timber, but the ends of it where the curve becomes increased, we needed to get a tree that fitted it, or 2 trees that fitted it as it happened. And so when we got them felled, you can see the picture on the right. My eye, fortunately, with that on that one was right. When we put the patterns on the top, they fitted almost exactly. Now, these, of course, this isn't, of course, using traditional techniques. This was such a valuable piece of timber to us. As I say, we'd been searching about 18 months for it. And we were so inexperienced at the time that we took the decision to cut a blank out of it. So we used a chainsaw mill, set up a wooden rail, cut out a blank that's 6 inches thick, that is, and eventually the blank would be 14 inches wide. You have to excuse me, I mix my measurements quite frequently. And the Saxons would have used inches anyway, and so it helps to get into the Saxon mindset if you use the same measurements that they did. It makes it a bit more difficult because the computer uses millimeters, but anyway. So we cut these sections out with a chainsaw, and we took them down to the long shed. And from there, we've tried to, wherever we can, we've tried to finish everything with traditional tools. So we actually took out these pieces here in the side of the keel with the chainsaw again, made a small jig and took them out. But from then on, the whole of this piece is finished with axes. So each edge was surfaced with an axe, and the bevel that would eventually, and the taper on the keel would all be done with axes. And here the keel is on the strong back, the black strong back that we set it on. And you can see some of our volunteers then beginning to look at cleaving and converting wedges from cleaved logs into 1 inch thick pieces of planking. And in the background there, you've got the softwood molds that we eventually are going to set up. So here we are on the right, setting up the first mold. It was quite a big day. And then, using other timbers. This is ash. We started to make some oars in ash. Everybody, unfortunately, is keen to get rid of their ash because of the risk of dieback. But ash, straight ash for us, is great for making oars. So we were experimenting to start with ash, and we were able to cleave this one, although it didn't cleave quite straight. We were able to get an oar certainly out of 1/2 of that. And we were able then to carry on setting up the molds and begin to work properly using axes to take timber down from the log to the shapes that we wanted. And this on the right is, I think that's the stern post actually, which is raised up to the end of the ship. So here we've got, on the left, we've got the keel with the black painted molds on it, and we've got the extensions, the underlouts, which rise up in a curve from it. So these are bent timbers. It's the way the tree has naturally grown, and you can see we've put scarves on it. We found we could square the ends quite happily with axes. We could put scarves on it with axes, and if necessary, we would just tickle them at the end with a draw knife. But all of this now is being done with axes and draw knives, and the odd large framing chisel, which they did use. They did have chisels in the Saxon period. And so you can see here, our volunteers are actually hollowing out the top surface of the stem and the underlout, sorry. And that's because the original rivets that they found, sometimes they had the roves where the roves were not parallel to the head. So the head of the nail would be square, obviously, to the shank, but the rove would be sat at an angle. And knowing where that was from, it indicated that they tried to get the sides of the keel, the land on the keel where the plank attached to, down to the same 1-inch thickness as the planking. But inevitably, in places with a rolling bevel here, which goes very steeply up to the stem, it's inevitably some of the rows didn't quite go on square. But it meant that we needed to hollow out the insides of the ends of the ship. And so eventually we got the backbone finished with the stern post here set up. Again, I'm not quite sure the Saxons would have built anything as elaborate as that to work off, but we still have to meet modern health and safety standards. So we've built a working platform at each end, and we'll have to have some movable platforms in the middle to work from. So the height of that stern post is roughly 14 feet off the ground. Fortunately, it doesn't have to go out of that door because that door doesn't reach quite high enough. The door at the other end does. And here you can see, again, working on the stem here, and you can probably see the tool marks, the axe marks in the wood. And we know we're doing it fairly well as the originals was, because in some of the timbers that have been recovered from other ships of the period, we can see the same axe marks, the same tool marks in these timbers. And again, here, this was converted from the log just using axes. This was a big day this time last year, actually, when we set the stem up, and we had the backbone complete then, and this is part of the crew that did the job. Now, it is not just a matter of building a ship. This is an experimental archaeology project, and so it's being recorded in all sorts of different ways. And this is the result of a laser scan of the building. In fact, it's 2 laser scans. The black image is the original laser scan, and overlaid on top of it is a second scan when we've completed the backbone of the ship and more or less completed the mold as well. And this is very useful to us because laser scanning is so accurate. What they do, they set up the laser scanner around 6 or 7, 8 places around the long shed, and it scans the whole shed. and it uses the walls of the shed and the framing of the shed to actually as a reference, and then all that can be removed digitally, and you get left with the ship, and it can be scaled to millimeter accuracy to ensure that we know that we're working accurately, and also we can compare exactly what we're doing to the drawings that we've got, and so we can keep a check on our accuracy. And later on, this can be used, it can be manipulated in all sorts of ways, and we can document everything that we've done. And then this is where we begin to run into issues. Wood, as you well know, is a very individualistic type of material. And at this end of the ship, the stern of the ship, where we'd hollowed out the underlayout, we'd actually broken through into the pith of the timber, the very center of the log. And whereas usually it would run fairly straight up the piece, here you can see it's all over the show with a couple of knots in it as well. And as it dried, despite us coating it with oil and fats and all sorts of things to try and reduce the speed at which it dried, it split quite badly. And on the left of this shot here, towards the upper end of it, it actually split right the way through the plank land. And so we had to take some decisions here. Would we stay true to our aims of trying to do things authentically, or would we repair it? We had various marine surveyors and boat builders, consultants look at this, but in the end, and we could have repaired this. We could have repaired this by letting a piece in and gluing it. But for the authenticity of the ship, in the end, we decided to take this piece out and repair and replace it. And of course, that entailed going and finding a new piece to replace it, which took us about 3 months. And then the extra work of converting this piece of timber again. And so here we are in the woods. Again, I'm sure you've all done stuff like this. This time we took a pattern because we very definitely wanted to get the right piece. And you can see this picture in the center, there's too much curve in that piece. The picture on the left is too much of an abrupt kink in the middle of it. And the picture on the right, well, that was very nearly correct. But down at the butt end where my colleague Richard is standing, it just dipped away in an opposite direction to where we wanted it to go. So we didn't think that they were right. And again, we can go and look all over the place. This is in the west of Suffolk. This is a commercial tree farm. They've been farming trees here since the 1650s, and this is their third crop. So it's quite long-term work. And there were, you can see the numbers on the trees. I'm sure you've all been to sites like this. There are 160 trees felled, and not one of them was suitable for any of our needs. They were either too bent or too straight, or knots in the wrong place, branches in the wrong place. And so we didn't get anything from there. And so as a final thing, we put out a social media post saying, has anybody got any curved trees? And we got a response from the Woodland Trust down at Hainault Forest in Essex. And they were thinning out this section of their woodland to let the ground cover regrow and to bring native species back in, both flora and fauna. And they had to remove half a dozen trees. And this one on the right here is exactly what we were looking for. We put our patterns not quite correctly aligned there, but that was the one we took 3 actually, and we'll use the other 2 for framing. But we took it back to the long shed and started working on it. While I'm away doing all this, the volunteers are really beginning to get to grips with cleaving timber. So this is a 5-meter long log, 16-foot log. And by driving wedges into the end, hopefully a natural felling shake usually after it's dried a little bit, we can drive oak wedges into the end and into the top and encourage the split to work its way along the log until eventually it will cleave in half. And you can see here, it has cleaved really well, this one. It's really quite straight. There's very little twist in it, and there's very little damage as well. The fibers have actually cleaved apart very nicely. So this is the other half of it, when we've got a quarter there, and we've got 2 1/8 sections there. And we would normally try and get it to a 16th, down to a 16th, because otherwise there's too much waste. But the more you split them down into smaller sections, the less width you have left in the cleaved section. And so with this one, we actually had to leave it in 8ths, and it made a lot more work and a lot more waste, although that we can reuse the waste for all sorts of different things, for smaller parts of the ship, and for making merchandise to sell. And then the actual eventual real waste goes back into the forest as mulch for footpaths and things like that. So once we've got our 8th or 16th section, we can then, using axes, take that down to 1 inch in thickness. We know that was the thickness of the planking, because between the head of the rivets and the roves was 2 inches, and they could even see a difference in the corrosion pattern of the nail midway between the rove and the head, the rove and the nail head. So we know that the planking was 1 inch thick. So again, we can begin to notch it out, and we've actually used a plywood pattern. The Saxons and penciled around it. The Saxons would probably have just put an axe strike along it, where the shape that they wanted, and take it out from that. But again, with a little forest axe here, we can do that job really nicely and easily. And depending on the skill of the volunteer, we might just use a draw knife to get a final finish on the plank edge. And then the planks are fitted to the hull, and each one is different. Each strake, each row of planking has either 5 or 6 individual pieces of planking in it. And here you see we weren't quite ready to nail them up yet, but we have been able to put them in place and clamp them on with some traditional type clamps. These are actually slightly later period. These are reconstructions of Viking era clamps. The one area that we couldn't really use those is on the feather edges of the scarves. So they're 6-to-1 scarves, so it's 6 inches long down to a feather edge. And the real benefit that we find of a G-clamp is just the finesse that we can use with it. When you're knocking a big wedge into 2 pieces, it's not quite gentle enough for working with scarves. So we do tend to use G-clamps in the ends of the planking just to hold it in place. So the 5th scale model progressed, and here you can see it complete. It was built upside down using modern techniques, really. It's got plywood planking, a laminated mahogany backbone, and oak shear strakes on it. The top strake is the shear strake, and that's in oak. And this has been very useful because it's been suggested in the literature that the shear strake was actually 3 inches thick rather than 1 inch thick, and that's so that it can take the tholes, that the pieces that it's effectively our modern equivalent of our modern day rollock. And but if it was 3 inches thick in the middle, it still has to taper down to 1 inch thick where it fits into the hood ends in the stem. And so this has been very interesting in working out exactly how that taper might have worked. So this model has certainly proved its worth in that area and others. And you can see here again, we've tried it out in full size on our midships model. You can see here the different types of fastenings that we used. We started as just for getting volunteers going. We started just using modern copper boat nails, But as we got closer to working out exactly how we were going to do things, we used different types of iron and even some mild steel in just to see how that would work. But eventually we settled on these wrought iron nails with diamond shaped rows, which are what we believe, that's the closest we believe that we can get to the bog iron that was used originally. But here in the sketch, you can see the cross section with the 1 inch thick strakes and the 3 inch thick planking for the thole, which the oar would pull against. And it obviously, from that thickness, it has to taper down at the ends. But there's a question as to whether these spikes, the reason that the archaeologists felt that it was a 3 inch thick shear was these spikes were 1 inch diameter, they said. And obviously you can't drive that through a 1 inch or even 1.5 inches thick plank. So they said, well, it's probably 3 inches. Well, we can drive that through a 2 inch plank easily. So on this model, we tried the shear strakes at 2 inches, and that might work. The problem occurs because in the original excavation, all that the archaeologists could actually look at is the inside of the ship. It had all been crushed as it with the weight of the material on it, and as it desiccated and decayed, it had all been crushed to a thin line of black sand, and they were looking at the inside. They couldn't see what the outside was like. So we're having to work this out as we go. So while that's going on in the yard, I'm still out looking at wood and chasing wood, and this is the felled piece of timber for the replacement underlaut, and they're just tickling the chainsaw there prior to getting it to us. And here it is in the long shed with the top surface taken off with an axe, and then the other surfaces are worked on in turn. And this is one of the problems again of timber. You can't tell what it's going to be like until you get into it. And here you can see black stain. This, I believe, is beefsteak fungus. And all the curved timbers, all the curved logs that we've had appear to have this fungal infection in it. The straight logs don't appear to, so I don't know if folk have any experience of that. I know that wood turners really like this dark timber because of its contrasting color to the normal heartwood. But the reason that seems to be there is because of this defect, this branch in the wood here. And obviously the tree it's got broken off, and the tree has healed itself and grown around it to the extent that you couldn't see anything on the outside except this slight bulge. And we could count the rings on this, and this was about 17 years old, this branch, when it got broken off, or was deliberately broken off. But anyway, we were able to, we continued to work on the piece of timber, and eventually we got it down to this small area here. And you can see how we've worked the sides of it. We put a template on at various intervals and cut out a notch, and then we can work the rolling bevel as we go up from those notched areas, and just make sure the bevel is even as we go up, regular as we go up. And that's the finished item. Again, all done with axes. The scarf's just tickled with a draw knife, but the rolling bevel you can see really nicely there as it goes up. And that's some of the most difficult work I think we'll have to do in the ship. And finally, that was fitted, and we've got two of our volunteers here drilling holes for the fastenings. The fastenings in the backbone are tree nails. We've used oak tree nails in the backbone for strength, whereas the fastenings that hold the frames to the planking are in softwood. We're using willow. It could be a pine, or it could be Scots pine. There wouldn't be Douglas fir or anything like that here in the period. But we know that willow was, so we could use willow or pine. And it's been filmed here by a guy from Time Team. The television series Time Team is back. It's on YouTube, and they're following the build of the ship. and they're trying to put together a series that can be shown regarding the ship and the sea trials afterwards. No prizes for guessing when this was taken. The model now is turned over, and we've started to fit the framing inside it. So at 1/5, the framing is roughly 1 inch square, and we can make that out of oak, and we can fit it. And it's surprising, actually, when the hull is completely empty, if we lift it up by the stem and the stern post, just how flexible it is, both in twist and also in longitudinal direction. It's very, very bendy and twisty. But as soon as we put anything in, so in this case, we've just clamped the original mold back in the middle of the ship, it stiffens it up tremendously, and it really does show how much strength the frames will add to the ship once we get it all sorted in the end. So here we are having the delivery of some timber for planking. There were 4 trees actually came from the National Trust at Blickling Hall. These are actually, 2 of these are actually being delivered to Sutton Hoo, where we'll do demonstrations of cleaving. It's quite nice, really, quite circular. We've gone back to Sutton Hoo, which is just across the river from where we are. And we'll do demonstrations for their visitors there. And we actually have here some Scots pine, which has come from the Sutton Hoo estate, and they will be used for some prototype oars. We're not sure what material the oars were made of, but obviously Scots pine is roughly half the density, half the weight of oak or ash, and so if we could make them out of pine, then they would be very much lighter and very much easier to use, the oars. But it's an experiment, really. We will see what happens there. But we do have to use modern tooling. Obviously, the trees nowadays are cut down with chainsaws, and that's fine. And we use hydraulic high abs. They're great. But we'll also, from when we get to this position where the high ab can't get any further into the shed, we'll use a turfer to actually manual winch to pull them into the correct procedure, into the correct places. And so here we are, we've come pretty much up to date. We've started nailing the planking onto the ship. You can see here the 2 garboard strakes. The first strakes are actually nailed on. You can see the diamond shaped roves here. And we're working generally with the axes to convert the stems of the pine into oars. These are just 2 modern commercial axes. We tend to use Grand-Force Brooks axes because they're the best, really, and they're commercially available and not too expensive. But we do have special T-axes made for finishing. So the surfaces, these are finished with long T-axes, and they are really beautiful, really easy to work. So there we are. That's about where we're at the moment. We'll continue planking this year. We think there's 90 or 100 individual pieces of planking. And if we can get 2 on a week, we'll have her fully planked by the end of the year. That'll leave us next year to fit out the inside and finish all the oars, and then launch her hopefully in the spring of 2025. And then the big job will actually be learning to row the ship. There's 40 oars. She does have a rudder, or she will have a rudder, but to actually learn to row that ship on tidal water will be quite some achievement. But assuming we can do that and don't break the ship, then the plan is that she goes off on 3 voyages to visit the neighbouring territories that the East Anglians would have had. So that's trips into Mercia, trips into Wessex, and trips up to Northumbria. So there's quite a major set of trials planned for the ship. And then finally, she'll go to a good home in a museum somewhere. The whole project will be written up and documented in lots of different ways, from hopefully a time team series through to academic publications and all the different types of drawings and videos and films, stills film. We'll have a really good record of what has been done for folk in the future. So there we are. There's the reconstruction of the Sutton Hoo ship as it stands. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Well, firstly, can I say thank you very much, Tim? That was a really fascinating talk, and it does run very parallel with a lot of things that we've done as part of the Carpenters Fellowship, including the House of Wessex Anglo-Saxon Hall that we built in Oxfordshire, which I believe Damien may have even mentioned too, because he was heavily involved with us on that one as well.
Yeah.
First question, which is strangely un-timber related, is do you have an on-site blacksmith making all your metalwork for you? Or...
We don't. We don't actually. The Longshed is managed by another charity, and they were due to health and safety reasons, they were concerned about hot work in the Longshed. So we've actually contracted that out to a chap called Alex Pole. You may have heard of Alex Pole Ironworks in the West Country, some of you. Alex has got a really good reputation for traditional ironwork. He also makes a very good range of kitchen utensils, pans and things like that. But Alex made our finishing axes, our T-axes, and he's also making all the nails for us. So it's wrought iron made by Top & Co in Yorkshire. They're one of the few, I think they might even be the only major producer, commercial producer of wrought iron in the country now. And how they do it, I don't know. I think they probably use a lot of recycled wrought iron. And so they're sending the iron to Alex Pole, and he's making the nails and sending it to us. There's some things in the project which is sort of one step too far, really, and we felt we'd got enough on our plate building the ship, and we'd leave that to someone who really knew what they were doing.
Yeah, totally understand that. Does, and it makes sense to keep the fire away from the timber, even though albeit green timber for the most part, it's that's a lot of wood around.
Yeah,
that's fascinating. Anybody else with questions?
Good evening there. I just wanted to know if it was open to view at Sutton Hoo.
So we're not at Sutton Hoo. We're on the water. We're on the quayside in Woodbridge,
right?
Just next to the Woodbridge Tide Mill, and it is open 7 days a week. Yes. So we, as the Sutton Hoo Ships Company, are working Monday to Friday on the ship, and it's open between 9 and 4 every day. And then the Woodbridge Riverside Trust open the Longshed at the weekends, and it's open about 10 till 3, 11 till 3, something like that at the weekend. So yes, if you're in the area, do come and visit us and see what we're doing. Mention that you're with the Carpenters Fellowship, and you might even get the full tour.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Fine.
Quick question. How green were the logs when you cleaved them?
They vary. I mean, we're finding out that we can leave them on the ground in the log for quite a substantial period of time. There's one log that had been felled over a year, and it hadn't significantly dried out because it was left in the log with the bark on. Some of them, the planking logs, are being felled 1 month and worked on the next. I mean, I don't know if you folk have found, but this autumn, the leaves seem to have stayed on the oaks a lot longer, and the sap is still risen in the trunk. Even in November, we had some felled in November, the latest planking logs in November, when the sap should really perhaps have gone down a bit, but they were still really wet. And as soon as we drove a wedge into the end of them, the water just spurted out and continued to flow onto the ground. So there is an advantage really in leaving them on the ground in the log for a season. I think that's possibly what the Saxons did. They may even have felled in the winter and the spring, gone away and done their farming and whatever in the summer, and come back and built the ship over the next autumn, winter, spring season.
Fantastic. Okay, if nobody else has anything to ask, I'm going to say thank you as well to Tim and to everybody for turning up. It was really great to see everyone. I'll hand over to Mark to say goodbye.
Tim, may I ask you a question?
Oh, go on. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Damien. Thank you very much, Tim. It was fantastic. I was just wondering what makes you refuse a piece when you choose a plank. Whenever you cleave a tree,
Yeah.
what that will make you refuse anything to be hewn to the specification?
If there are knots in it, so I don't like if trees got epicormic growth, I can't tell how from the outside, I can't tell how deep those epicorms grow. And people say, oh, they don't go in very deep, but some of them actually go very deep. That it's almost a branch that goes to the center of the tree. So I don't like trees with epicormic growth on them. And where there are knots in the length of the tree, it's often difficult to cleave. And you'll get a wasted piece anyway. So I try to minimize the number of knots running up or branches in the side of a tree, particularly if they're in more or less a line, it's not so bad because I might lose one or two cleaved sections. If they're running around half the tree, then I'm not really very interested in that one. Also, I don't know if you're aware of the way a tree can twist as it grows, and you get twisted grain in the bark of the tree. If you get a twisted grain, then the log will cleave following that twist. The heartwood of the tree will follow that twist, and that can be advantageous because there is a lot of twist in some of the planks, and you can use the natural twist to actually make the plank fit more naturally rather than having to induce the twist ourselves. But sometimes the twist is so great, and we've had 2 logs now, I think, where we thought they would be okay, but they actually twisted through about 70 degrees as they cleaved, and it made it virtually useless for planking material. And so having cleaved that in half, we do then have to take a chainsaw to them to actually try and get any sort of useful timber out of them. And then we can't use it for planking. We might be able to use it for framing, excuse me, or for the thwarts, for the seats in the ship or something like that. But we have to be very careful if it's twisted too much as it's cleaved.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, last orders.
Well, I think it's a very fascinating project, and I think it's probably something that we should put together a small delegation of the Carpenters Fellowship to come down and visit you guys, and potentially even we've got an awful lot of hewers in our ranks, and I'm sure if there were some trees laying around that you required converting, we could potentially even lend a hand if that was of any use to you at some point in the future.
You'd be more than welcome to, and that yeah, it'd be great to have you down there. Yeah, and yeah, bring your work boots, bring your steelies, and then let's jump in.
Fantastic. Well, I'll be in contact and organise something, and
That'd be great,
I'm sure
yeah.
the members will be happy to jump on board.
Lovely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Tim. That was very fascinating.
That's a pleasure.